Welcome to Frankly Speaking, which is the Institute for Policy Reform's new series of interviews to inform and expound on issues of critical importance to the country and that affects the lives of each one of us. I'm Ashraf Hayat. Today we discuss why is it that the Pakistan economy is always in a perilous and precarious state. When and how we may expect the economy to gain momentum so that Pakistan too possibly joins the ranks of dynamic economies in order to improve living standards for all. And we have with us someone with the right combination of hands-on policy making and marketplace experience to guide us through the maze and labyrinth of what is holding us back. We will be frankly speaking with Harun Akhtar Khan. Harun Saab has a distinguished record of business success in public service. He was twice elected to the Senate of Pakistan, also twice elected to the Punjab Assembly, and he was Minister for Revenue and Special Assistant to the Prime Minister. In the latter assignment, he accomplished great success. As Senator, Harun Saab was active on key economic committees. As an ardent believer in parliamentary oversight, he gained high recognition for reviewing executive performance in pursuit of his goal of making government work for all. Welcome, Harun Saab. Harun Saab, your professional journey is especially interesting. A degree in actuaries, you moved to managing businesses and then a substantial career in Parliament, along with being a Minister for Revenue. What has kept you motivated to deliver consistently in these very demanding and diverse roles? Tell us also how different is it to serve in the executive government compared to working in the private sector?
Thanks a lot, Ashraf. Honored to be in your Frankly Speaking program. Very briefly, when I was young, somebody told me that the most difficult profession in the world is actuarial science. I was a little good in mathematics, so that stuck me because I was brought up to take challenges. So I took that challenge without looking left and right, and I was able to get the fellowship and the certification by both Canada and America at the age of 23. But just about a year after that, I was working for a life financial company. And I used to look up to the president, who was 60 years old, and I was like 23, 24. And I used to say that I have another 36, 37 years to reach that. And that was not something that I wanted out of life. So very soon I decided that I want to be on my own. I want to have financial independence. I do not want to work for somebody. I would like to work myself. And I took the plunge. I started a business in New York. Unfortunately, a decade after that, I lost my father in Pakistan. So I had to come back to Pakistan to look after my mother, and had to start from scratch in Pakistan. Private sector is very good because you're your own boss, and you're focused on your business, and the focus is to make the business profitable for the shareholders, and you keep on expanding and improving so that you remain competitive and you have an edge over the competitors. But as you start making money, and if you have fire in the belly, and if you want to do more, then you start thinking big, and you start thinking that, okay, I'm doing all this for my business, I'm making good money, but is that what I want out of life? And that's where public service comes in. And for me, the motivation was my father, and he died prematurely at the peak of his career, and I wanted to do something for the country too. We were never born or raised as politicians, but that was something that was sort of acquired because of the circumstances. So anyways, my primary focus was business. I love to do my own business. But then because of my elder brother, Humayun, he sort of dragged me into politics. And thank you very much for your kind words about my accomplishments in politics. But when I went to the Senate, I was told that, Senate is really a rubber stamp and stuff like that and all that. But I always knew that Senate has an oversight role. And if you do your job properly, if you make the effort, and if you make the committees effective, then you can play a very important role. So I was fortunate enough that I had some good colleagues also. I had some of the best lawyers around me, some economists also, Professor Rashid. And we together made the Finance Committee and the Commerce Committees very, very effective. I learned a lot, and I made those committees effective, and we played a very important role. But once my term finished in Senate, I wanted to, because Parliament is an oversight, it's not an executive position. So then I had in mind that if God gives me an opportunity for an executive role, I'll take it. And then this opportunity came in to represent the Revenue Division as a special assistant to the Prime Minister and a federal minister. I had a 3-year stint. That's a totally different ballgame. The difference between private sector and public sector is that private sector, you're your own boss, you take decisions are fast and rapid, and you see the results. In public sector, in the government, it's very difficult. I mean, you have to convince a lot of other people, and there are a lot of undercurrents and biases and all that. But you have to learn very fast because people do not give you time. And the division that I represented was measurable. Everything was quantifiable. It was measurable in the terms of revenue that you collect. So I learned a lot. It was difficult dealing with all sorts of people, but I learned a lot, and it gives you more contentment because you do something for the country. Like if you collect revenue makes countries prosperous. Like revenue and profitability makes businesses prosperous. Revenue for the country makes the country prosperous. Today, America is prosperous because it has the best revenue collection system. It has the highest income per capita, and it has highest revenue collection. That is what has made America a superpower. So Pakistan can also be a major power, other than being a nuclear power, can be a major economic power if our economy turns around and if our revenue collection turns around. So that's a brief answer to your question.
And it's a fortunate person who can draw satisfaction from public service. I've had my own modest experience, and certainly it is extremely satisfying. Still focusing on your government experience, sir, why is it that the Pakistan economy is so dependent on outside help? Pakistan began seeking international economic aid in the 50s. Coming out of the great wars and the turbulence of colonialism, a large number of countries did the same. Since then, many of those other economies have graduated out and are no longer aid recipient. Some of them have actually become donors. Yet Pakistan is in its 22nd IMF program and has continued to borrow from virtually anywhere funds are available. That must be a record of some kind. We're especially keen to know, where does the borrowed money go?
This is something which frustrates me a lot, bothers me a lot. I had this unique advantage of, when I came back, to compare things happening in Pakistan to other countries, the developed countries. I worked in many countries, and I had experience in some of the top firms. You know, IMF or World Bank, they're like a bank. I mean, you've been outside Pakistan for many years, represented Pakistan at very high levels. You understand that. If I go to a bank as a representative of a private sector company, I need the bank for a project. I need the bank for leverage so that with a small amount of equity and the bank's leverage, I can make something big. But that is for a certain purpose. And once I make something big and I pay back the loan, the business stands on its own. If I keep going back to the bank every time the loan is paid off without expanding my business, the bank will refuse to pay me. So this is what is happening in Pakistan. We go to IMF as a bank of last resort because we run out of foreign exchange, our reserves deplete, and then IMF acts like a true bank. They want to ensure that you return their money. And what they do, their model across the world is they suppress the economy, monetary contraction, increasing taxes, low GDP growth, so that you don't import much and your current account deficit improves. But the problem is, as soon as you get out of the IMF program, and as soon as you start growing the economy, you're hit by the same current account deficit. Primarily for Pakistan, it's the trade deficit, and you're back to square one. A case in point, even today, after 2.5 years, November, December results are showing improvement. Your exports have started to grow, and your large-scale manufacturing has started to grow, but so has your current account deficit started to grow. It has doubled. So we are back to square one. 2.5 years ago, the only problem the economy had was a current account deficit. So we had to go with the IMF. And today, as soon as we start growing, we are hit with a current account deficit. Our problem, the root of the problem, is the current account deficit, primarily triggered by the trade deficit. Our economy is too dependent on the imports. We do not have a vision for the economy. What is the vision of this economy? The vision of the economy is that anything that you import, sooner or later, must be replaced by domestic production. Even today, after 40 years, we still import car engines. We still import motorcycle engines. We still import any kind of sophisticated machinery. We can make missiles and bombs, but we cannot make a turbine, whereas our neighboring India can make all those things. So how are we going to substitute the imports? We import billions of dollars of edible oil. Why can't we grow the seeds which produce the edible oil? We import billions of dollars of mobile phone. Why could we not have an industry to produce the mobile phone here? Why could we not graduate from a CKD kit in 30 years of the car industry and make those things ourselves? It's our fault. That's the root problem. And that is why the moment the economy starts growing up, we start imposing taxes on the cheeses and the chocolates, but that's a tiny bit. We do not hit at the core problem. We are engaged in industrialization. The industry as a percentage of GDP is going down. So we are going in the opposite direction. We are having free trade agreements with China, which is very good, but it is not in our favor. The trade deficit with China is expanding. We went to the FTA 2. It's going to get it worse. Before, there were only 35 tariff lines which were covered by FTA 1. Now there are 70. So there is a basic flaw. This country needs industrialization. We have one of the best assets in the world, a young population, a relatively younger population. We have made that a liability. We've got to put them to work. And the only work that we can put them to is set up industries, and the private sector can do that. None of the countries in the 50 years which have become from a third world country to a developed country, look at Japan, look at South Korea, look at Singapore, look at China, have gone through it without an industrialization process. We have to understand that. And we have to make people comfortable and confident to invest their money. We cannot have a capitalist economy and a socialistic mindset. We cannot hate the rich. We cannot hate people who pay taxes and buy a big car and big houses. We cannot do that. Bill Gates is honored in the world just because of his money. nothing else. He's not a politician. So we should honor the people who have risked their money in this country, paid their taxes, and put the money back into the business to expand the business and create jobs. That's the problem. Unless and until we hit that problem, I do not think that we will be out of the stranglehold of the donor agencies.
And you're very right to point out that the trade deficit drives the current account deficit largely. Also, a lot of repayments of debt, older debts, that drives the current account deficit too, or the servicing of that debt, I should say. But certainly there isn't a value on increasing manufacturing in the country and therefore the exports, which is the logical way of reducing external dependence. But is it possible that choices made at the top level have created this dependence? And by that, I especially refer to how we choose to spend government funds. First, we do not invest enough in our people. That is, Pakistan has not developed the human capital needed to help businesses compete globally. And our HDI index or the competitiveness rankings are for all to see. Add to this lack of spending on infrastructure. If both these public goods are in short supply, businesses cannot grow or compete globally. And so we do not earn enough foreign exchange. So you've been at the top level of decision making. Is the issue of building competitiveness of our firms even a priority at the top level?
Ashraf Saab, I mean, there are a number of questions in that statement. Firstly, this country lacks leadership. This country has resources, this country has potential. I can say that with a lot of conviction because I've seen a lot of other countries too. Our country, the basic foundations of our country are good. The foundations of the country should enable us to reach from a third world country to a developed country. The problem is dearth of leadership, not just at the top, but at various levels, even at the institutional level. And the choice of people, we become biased. There is nepotism, there is cronyism, no matter what we say, but it exists in the political structure, in the parties, in whatever. We've got some good leaders on and off, and we've got some good people in institutions on and off, but not on a consistent level, not on a sustainable level. Now, you raised a very important point. How do we spend money? First of all, we have to have money. Like we are running a fiscal deficit of 7, 8, or 9%. I mean, we are moving towards a banana republic. I mean, once you reach 9%, anything over 5% is not good for the country. Under 5% is okay for a developing country, but not 8, 9, 10%. So why does that happen? Because we don't have revenues. Why don't we have revenues? Besides tax evasion, besides inefficiency of the revenue collector, the economy doesn't turn around, the wheel doesn't turn around. And in order to get more taxes, we put more obstacles on that wheel. The current case in point, inflation goes up, GDP goes down, comes down, the disposable incomes come down, we increase the tax, and everything is squeezed. Okay, so absolutely, we've got to spend money at the right places, but first of all, we have to spend money. The government's job is to make sure that the population is adequately educated. The government's job is to make sure, as you rightly said, to put in place the necessary infrastructure. But the government's job is not to run businesses at all. Again and again, the whole world experience says the businesses and industry has to be run by the private sector. You've got to give and facilitate the private sector and the confidence to put their money in there rather than in Pakistan, they're taking money out. There is something wrong in the whole system. There is so much money of the private sector, which even they have declared. So there's no tax evasion problem that can come back to Pakistan if there's confidence. And the talent will be produced by the private sector. The government should facilitate. There is so much regulation now that the businesses are in a stranglehold. There's the Anti-Money Laundering Act, there's the Competition Commission Act, there is OGRA, there are so many, everything that you look at. There's the Benami transaction, which are very good. Unfortunately, they're all copied from countries which have tried and tested and which use them judiciously. We don't even know how to use them. The Anti-Money Laundering Act was brought in to stop the financing of the terrorism, to stop the money coming from smuggling, to stop the money coming from kidnapping for ransom, the money coming from corruption. It is 99% used against the businessman for normal business transaction, which has made very difficult for the businessman to do anything without getting a suspicious transaction report. Similarly, Competition Commission. So you've got to be, the regulation is like the regulation of a developed country. The economy is like the economy of a third world country. There is a mismatch. And as far as the infrastructure is concerned, we have almost lost, I think it's coming back again, the opportunity of building that up through the CPEC. You may ask that question separately, but it pains me a lot that a country, China, where the bonds are, they go back as far as the 60s, was ready to invest in this country, which was going through a threat of terrorism. There was no other country. There was not a long queue of people who wanted to invest in Pakistan. This was one country which came forward. And it went well in the first couple of years. But the last 2.5 years is dismal progress. That has hurt us. Imagine without the help of China, could we have had the Peshawar-Karachi almost 90% complete motorway? Could we have the D.I. Khan Islamabad motorway? Could we have had the other the northern areas, the highways going to north? Could we have had the power plants which handled the 18-hour load shedding? It was just because of China. And then in the last 2.5 years, because of international politics, we put it in the back burner. So we have wasted that precious time. So, I mean, briefly, that's the answer to your points.
No, that's very valid. And I think that one of the things that I think we might have missed out on, as far as CPEC was concerned, is to have quickly built the SEZs and to have attracted investment for exports out of Pakistan. But that didn't happen. Also, the other thing that the taxpayer and the consumer doesn't know much of what is happening. And the government talks about non-disclosure. There's no such thing as non-disclosure. People have to know what's happening. People have to know what are the conditions at which loans have been signed. At least Parliament should know. And what are the conditions at which contracts have been signed. So CPEC was, and subsequently also there's some other contracts with other countries where non-disclosure seems to be the idea. I'd come back to your point about exports, and for several decades we've had an export structure which relies overwhelmingly on textiles, about 60%, 57, 58. Why is it that we can't diversify? Why is it that even within textiles, we continue to mostly, exceptions aside, compete on price and not on quality or value?
Ashish, many good questions. Let me talk about the CPEC going into export-oriented industries. That was the second phase, specialized economic zones. It never happened. You have to go through the first phase to reach the second phase. But anyways, I'll stop there. Regarding disclosure, I think sometimes when you sign contracts with a country, the country does not want total disclosure. And I'm pretty sure, I think this has been already written, so I can talk about that. Under some of the agreements we signed with China, that was a condition, not because there was anything fishy in that. We got one of the best interest rates, we got one of the best soft payment plans spreading over 20 years, but they did not want to disclose that because they were doing agreements with other countries also. So if they do a good agreement with Pakistan, they don't want to be quoted about that elsewhere. So you have to honor the disclosure requirements of the other side of the party. As far as exports and textile, you see, granted, I mean, we did not diversify, but we did establish a niche in the world for the textiles, for the leather goods, for the surgical goods, for the carpets, for the sports good. I mean, could we have ever imagined that our football could be used in the World Cup, Football World Cup? They were used, okay? Could we have ever imagined that very sophisticated, made of stainless steel, surgical goods will be used in the operations in the most modern countries? So we did that. The government didn't do it. The private sector did it. And it is improving. As I said, the private sector understands that if they have to bring in dollars for the textile goods, they have to add value. And they have. They are huge conglomerates. I don't want to name them. They have moved from yarn to finished goods. We are doing very well in hosiery. We are doing very well in knitwear. We are doing very well in towels, household, and all those. We are doing that. So let them progress. I mean, by diversifying, we must not leave the focus on what we already have in hand and go into the value addition. I know for a fact that we have gone down in carpets. We have gone down in leather goods. So there's something wrong there. And there's a lot of talk about subsidy and all that. You see, you must not give subsidy to a business without a reason. But why does export sometimes get subsidy? Number one reason is when you have a strong rupee as compared to the real effective exchange rate. So from 2013 and 2018, if we kept the rupee strong as against the real effective exchange rate, we were 20% overvalued. That had an impact on our competitive edge. So your power rates, your utility rates were going up. We were not competitive anymore. Not only that, your neighbors like India and Bangladesh were giving subsidies. So you have to compete. It's not that we want to make Mr. X or XYZ group rich. It's we have to bring in the dollars. See what China did. The number one plan for a country which wants to do away with going back to the donors again and again, because once you go back to the donors, then it is not a homegrown solution. Then it is a solution suggested by the donors because they have to get their money back. What China did it at all costs, they said we have to build the reserves. This is what India did. Once you build the reserves, and then you can have a homegrown solution. So in order to build the reserves, China had given for many years free electricity, free gas to their export sector. You'll be surprised how much subsidies India gives and how they treat their export business, and how they treat their domestic business. Here, a business and an industry is looked down upon. It sort of started in the 70s when that slogan of socialism started coming in. It hasn't gone, it hasn't left. I am totally in favor of giving welfare to the people, because as you grow, there is a certain segment of the population which is left behind. But welfare comes in with dollars and cents. And the welfare comes in if the country is prosperous. The country is prosperous if the economy is good. The revenues fall in. So you should have all the social welfare nets that you can think of, but first you have to make the country prosperous. When the country is prosperous, you can do anything on the social welfare front. You can't make a Scandinavian country out of Pakistan with the economy the way we have today.
Yes, except that we are now banking on an infant industry that is 60 years old, and it's not going to bail us out. We have to think in terms of new products. And that's the recognized path that East Asia followed. They imported a product and incrementally replaced imported components with domestic production. And of course, there's a whole complex arrangement of access to credit, facilities, incentives by government behind it. And then gradually, from being a net importer of that product, they became net exporters. And they replicated this idea over many, many products and became the economic powerhouses that they are. Established brands of Sony, Huawei, Samsung were built on exactly this concept. They call it the flying geese concept, which is that you import, you start exporting, and then you gradually get out of that product and get into the next higher technology or knowledge-intensive product. We've been manufacturing, assembling autos, manufacturing intermediate engineering goods, and household appliances for many years. But we don't see a brand that is exportable, even to developing countries. Why do you think this is so?
Ashraf Saab, I mean, that takes me to my initial point. You're dead on. That is exactly what I'm saying. We start importing finished goods and we commit that through the deletion program in 5 years or 10 years down the road, we will be making these goods ourselves. It doesn't happen. I am a strong supporter and a strong proponent of import substitution. We have to do that. I am a businessman. I have to go and import even the smallest type of machinery. Why is that so? It must not be that. Even if there is a manufacturer here, he is only assembling. The air conditioners in Pakistan are only being assembled. We can't even make a compressor. We can't. I mean, 30 years from now, we used to import the CKD kits of the cars. Today, we are importing that. 40 years ago, we were importing motorcycles, small engines. Even today, we are doing that. We have become assembly manufacturers. If I have to have the smallest type of a motor which performs well, I have to import. Fine, I mean, we have an option now to go to China. But why not in Pakistan? Why can't we make our own mobile phones? Going to agriculture, why can't we have our own seeds to make the edible oil? Why? Why do we have to import so much palm oil? Soybean seed. Why? Because of the policies. That's where the policies lack. That's where the leadership lacks. That's where the vision lacks. And it's frustrating.
No, and I entirely
mind-boggling. And that affects the lives of 220 million people of our country. When God wants to turn around this country, it will give this country good leaders. And I'm not saying okay, we don't have good leaders. We have good leaders, but good leaders mean at every level.
No, I entirely agree. And I think that is exactly the point that I was driving at right in the beginning. And these here also, I don't expect Pakistani businesses to become Samsung or Sony, because those things that we continue to export, those policies were laid down in the 50s and 60s. And that was when we had business-friendly policies. By business-friendly policies, I don't mean that they're anti-people or they're directed to a particular individual group or firm. They're generally business-friendly to develop industry. And so we had clusters of, say, how do you call it, surgical goods in Sialkot or sports goods in Sialkot. That is actually pre-partition. Or steel fabrication in Gujarat, and so on. Textiles in Faisalabad, textiles in Kotri and Karachi, and so on. And we still continue to depend on those goods. Those are the only goods that are still competitive. Since then, we've gone into this rut of economic dependence, following conditions, and those conditions are valid. From their point of view, I don't grudge those conditions. But following those conditions and not focusing on savings, investment, and manufacturing more and manufacturing into high value added. Nor have we invested in, as I said before, in the human capital or the required infrastructure. We're coming towards the end of this discussion because I think that we've achieved quite a bit here. I I want to refer to FBR. Now, that's an organization that you're very familiar with. In fact, you drove it very well. It has a history of trying to increase direct taxes as a share of total government revenue. But that hasn't met with much success. And in difficult times, what government does is, and you already pointed this out earlier, it increases GST or imposes regulatory duties, and it further dampens industry and demand and consumption. Indirect tax is also an unfair burden on the weaker economic segments. Is this again the political economy at work? Is it possible that influential groups get away without meeting their responsibilities? And I don't mean by groups of business. I mean by groups, I mean a whole category of people, traders, and so on. I want to ask you that because I'm sure that that's something that you've grappled with a lot.
Ashwin, just a brief comment on your earlier question, then I'll come to the revenue. No country, again, I keep on using this word, move from a developing to a developed country without making huge conglomerates. Look at South Korea, look at Japan, huge trading houses started by one person became huge, bigger than each conglomerate, bigger than Pakistan's economy. And look at China now. They've made so many billionaires and all that. A socialistic mind, communist mind country. Look, I mean, they let people invest and they let people make money. I will make a very short statement. Pakistan, before it becomes a developed country, will have to see billionaires, will have to make billionaires, will have to make conglomerates and let them survive. Let them be there. You leave them without the fear and intimidation of investigative agencies. You give them confidence. You protect their money. You have constitutional amendments to protect people's money, rather than being fearing that some investigative agency will come and forfeit the money, because all these acts have the draconian powers which are used unjudiciously in the business environment. So a lot needs to be done. Businessman needs confidence. A businessman will keep his money under his mattress in cash and not invest and wait for the right time. But he will not invest where there is a fear element. So we have to correct that. We cannot say one day that we are pro-industry and the other day that we are going to go after the rich. So you've got to have that mindset. The second thing is, always remember that all the countries that turned around in a brief period of time were not turned around by economists, were turned around by people who had a vision. Pakistan has a serious problem that there are certain people who know what the ground realities are and how they can be corrected, and there are certain economists which know the economy but don't know the ground realities, and the people who know the ground realities do not the economy. There are very few people who know the two. They are in Pakistan. So we need somebody who has an economic vision. I keep on saying the future wars in the world will be won not by who has more bullets and guns and bombs, who has a stronger economy. So that is one comment. Now revenue, that's my passion, because I got the opportunity to stay there. First of all, direct and indirect taxes. You see, the biggest direct tax, indirect tax is sales tax. Over 160 countries in the world have sales tax. Across the border, we talk a lot about India because we can easily compare with them. They have sales tax going up to 28%. Okay, we have sales tax to 17%. It's a huge money maker. Now, it's a consumption tax. You consume more, the rich consume more, they make more taxes. So it's never meant to deplete the disposable income of the poor people. So you do not tax the small number of electricity units or the gas units that a poor person consumes. You do not tax the food items that a poor person does. If you do, then that's the wrong policy. You tax for people who consume, who have the power to go and buy 10 air conditioners cars, things of daily use, cheese, for that matter, imported material and all that, to tax them. And they're willing to pay that. As far as that is concerned, I think that there are some anomalies, and there are certain things like ghee has a sales tax, like sugar has a sales tax. I think I'm totally against that. I think that is an element of poor people, and it should not be taxed that way. But coming to the income taxes, people think that withholding tax is an indirect tax. It's not an indirect tax. Withholding taxes, all withholding taxes in Pakistan are advance income taxes. And why did we have to resort to that? First of all, people do not file their taxes. This government has done pretty well in increasing the number of filers from 1.9 million to 2.9 million. That is a good step, good encouraging step. And secondly, the economy is not documented. The world is almost now on digital money, on plastic money. Is hardly any case. In America, you go and take $100 bill to somebody. They call their supervisor and they're looking through the microscope whether this is genuine or not, because they've never seen it, or very seldom they see it. It's all credit card money, and now they have credit card which are wireless. You flash it in front of a machine and it's done. So, and that's all documentation. Pakistan is moving towards that. The state bank governor has done very major things. He's a guy with the out-of-box thinking, and I think if he stays, he can bring in a lot of improvements in that. We're going towards digital. So as long as it's not there, it is impossible to expect that everybody is going to file their taxes and everybody is going to record their cash transaction. And FBR is not sophisticated enough to analyze whether a return is genuine or whether a return is evading taxes. So we have then advanced income tax, which we call withholding tax, which are based on transaction. You buy a car. The idea is if you can afford to pay $2 million for a car, then you pay a certain withholding tax, which if you file your return, you'll get it back. It'll be like your advance tax. When you buy a plot, you buy a house, you renew a license, and so on and so forth. So the only, and custom duties are not, I don't think they are indirect taxes. Every country has custom duty. We have one of the lowest custom duties. Our highest custom tariff is 20%. Fine, they have additional taxes and stuff like that. But imagine 20 years ago, our custom duty was going over 100%. So we come a long way. So the answer to that is we are improving. We should improve. We should move. The percentage of revenue collected should increase in terms of direct taxes and decrease in direct. That I agree with you. But that will take time. But we have done a lot. When I was there, I think you would know that we doubled the taxes, the revenue collection. FBR revenue collection we doubled, which is a simple growth rate of 20%. And that even when the inflation rate averaged on those 5 years, slightly over 3%. So doubling with an inflation rate of around 3%, doubling in 5 years, it is an accomplishment. And I think if we had just continued doing that, we would have achieved a lot. And so the real test of a revenue collection authority is the tax to GDP ratio, because somebody will say that the GDP was not growing, that is why we did not collect. So they take the tax to GDP ratio. We have dismally failed in that. I left it at 11.4. It was 11.4, 11.2, 11.4 for 3 years I was there. Today it is just around 9, which is really embarrassing, especially when they impose new taxes, squeezing the economy of about 2% of GDP. So comparing apples to apples, the ratio we left at 11.4 is now like about 7.5 tax to GDP, which is bad. Just very briefly, when I reached, I was not a tax expert, but I'm an actuary, so I've studied tax systems of different countries. So I realized within 2 weeks of all the presentations that my performance will be judged by the revenue that I collect. However, that today I can take some administrative steps in which I can increase the revenue, but 6 months down the road, my revenue will increase by the decisions and the reforms I bring in today. And the third thing I realized that FBR is not capable of bringing reforms because they are not for or any fault of theirs, but they are up on their toes. They're focused on the targets. So there has to be a separate line for the reforms, and I created that. Even, I mean, at that time there was a lot of status quo, but I've managed to get a tax reform implementation committee in which there were certain professionals from outside FBR. I had tremendous problems convincing FBR and all that, but we did bring in some reforms, a lot of reforms. Some of them have continued and some of them have become better and all that, but that committee is no longer there. The reform committee is no longer there. We only talk about reform and all that. The other problem is, I mean, which is digressing slightly, you see, the problem here is that anytime a new regime comes in, they spend a lot of time on criticizing and blaming everything on the previous regime. It's not just this regime. Every regime does that. They're doing more than the other regimes. And that they do not realize that because of the previous regime's flaws or faults, they're in power. Now they have to perform. I always believe that whatever regime Pakistan has had, they've done some good things also. And the good things is something that we should own. And beyond that, then we should move on and do better things ourselves. And that is the spirit in which the public sends a new government. We're still not there. We play politics, and economy is too important a thing to play politics with and pass your time without doing much. That's the unfortunate part. It happens today also. It has happened in many regimes previously.
I agree, except that you said that the government has done a good job by increasing the number of assessees or tax filers, tax return filers. And yet, as you point out yourself, the tax to GDP ratio has declined. So I'm not quite sure how well that has worked out. The other thing is this rather obsessive interest in documentation. In 2018 and 19, our urge for documentation actually brought the economy to a halt because it brought transactions to a halt. So these things are very nuanced and perhaps need deeper thinking than just sudden and jolts of action. I'd like to go to my last question, and you've alluded to most of the contents of this question, but I must ask it to close this discussion, but also because it's something that I consider very important. It's a generic one that deals with the state of governance in Pakistan. And please bear with me because it's a long question. In my view, there's an indifference and lack of interest in serious policy making in Pakistan, particularly economic. Policymakers at the highest levels learn to live with problems rather than deal with them. And several examples come to mind. We decry population growth, but do nothing about it. Same for changing the power policy in policy of 1994, and its many later incarnations. Every government has condemned it, but has done very little to reform. Same for climate change and across the board. There's something preventing action. Also, our governments are happy and eager to outsource policy making to others. We often let international institutions or another country or even individuals decide what is best for our people. Policy making is complex. It requires leaders to make difficult political judgments. Just gave an example of trying to document the economy and effectively bringing it to a halt. It is deeply linked with social norms and what is politically possible. It cannot be outsourced. So do you agree that when confronted with challenges or by influential lobbies, there's a reluctance by the political leadership, and I'm talking about decades of political leadership, no particular government, to holistically reform or solve problems, preferring to let them fester?
Ashraf Saab, one comment on your previous question, documentation. I totally agree with you. When you try to document the economy overnight, the transactions stop, and this is exactly the case in point. When you make opening an account and keeping money in the account and having a transaction so difficult that you question every time you deposit 500,000 rupees, then the money moves away from the bank under their mattresses, as I said before. When you give draconian powers to FBR and let low-level officers use that, there's more corruption and there is more lack of confidence and trust in the FBR, and more people will start leaving the net. The draconian powers always to every revenue collection authority are given to be used as a deterrent, not as a norm. When you start using it as a norm, the whole system is going to fail, and it will fail the way things are. Okay? Unfortunately, very unfortunately. I have learned I used a lot of powers, but very, very rarely. And once you use it, you pull back. And the other thing is that you do not use your power to ruin a business. So you use your power as a deterrent, as an example, get the evaded tax, give an example to the others so that they get back on track into the tax net and let the business move. Tax authority, revenue collection should go hand in hand with the GDP growth and the economy of the country. There are no two separate things, which is not happening. So that aside. Now, your last question, or maybe close to the last question, is a very important question. And I agree with everything you've said. Now, what is the solution? Okay. We have a Westminster-style democracy, okay, in which a person like you or the literate persons and white-collared persons and all those things, it's very difficult to go into the constituency politics and contest elections. I know my family goes through it, and I know I detest it, okay? And that is why I prefer Senate over becoming a member of the National Assembly or the provincial assemblies. So we end up with people who are mostly non-technocrats, who are mostly coming from political families, who are most coming from feudal families, and so on and so forth. The 1973 Constitution gave you space in terms of Senate, in which parties can send their nominations for people that they would like to bring into the cabinet to run certain departments. That has transformed again into sycophants coming into the Senate. I mean, those are my colleagues, ex-colleagues. Some of them are very good. I work with people like Asim Zafar, Raja Saab, Wasim Sajjad, Professor Khurshid, and many others. Even Ishaq Dar was a chartered accountant, politics aside, and some other good names I can take, go on and on. But today, and even in the days I was there, by and large, Senate is full of people who are experts, not in a particular subject, but experts in sycophancy. And that is the trouble. So I strongly recommend that there should be certain seats, like your women seats in the National Assembly. There should be certain seats for specialty people who are brought in order to run certain departments should that party come into power. There is a severe brain drain in Pakistan. And I can say that because the thousands of people that God has given me the ability to manage, I see how difficult it is to get a good manager in Pakistan. Because the top students, I'm telling you with a lot of conviction, they all leave Pakistan. And there's no harm in them leaving Pakistan and getting educated there in top universities, Ivy Leagues and Oxfords and the Cambridges and all that, and come back and serve the country. But they do not come back. 90% stay there. Only the people belonging to business families who have a business to run come back. Very few would come back. That's a brain drain. We educate them to high school, and the developed world make use of them. People are going to America, Canada, Europe, England, Australia, New Zealand, so on and so forth. And that has to be stopped. India stopped that because the first priority of an Indian graduate who graduated from a top university is to come back to their own country, because they have developed the high-tech industry at the top level. We haven't done it. Okay, so there's something wrong in our policy making. Ashraf Saab, I am of the belief that if you are a leader of anything, the country or the institution, you've got to get the job done. You cannot pass the blame that my manager and my general manager is not working. So in order to do that, you've got to get the best talent, whatever it takes. If it's available in Pakistan, well and good. If it's not available, get it from outside, because that talent will come only for a small, short period of time. They will set up a system, they will train some people, and they will go. So there is no harm in getting the top talent if one is not available in Pakistan. If you start doing that, in 5 years, it will be available in Pakistan. You cannot get into this patriotism and the person living outside is not patriotic. A person living outside, leaving a job, coming to Pakistan, he is more patriotic than a person who never left outside, who has to stay in Pakistan. So I have my firm beliefs. This country, again, this country has the potential. There's nothing wrong in the resources and the people of Pakistan. The problem is in leadership. There is severe dearth of leadership. And one day God is going to give us that, and this country will turn around.
Thank you. You talk about brain drain. Of course, it's a very small percentage of the top sliver of the society that can go to the Ivies or the other elite schools in the world. And yes, most of them don't come back. And that's why my insistence on building human capital. You can't develop by just investing in 1 or 2% of the population. One has to develop by investing in 100% of the population, 95% or more. And we failed to do that. But thank you very much. We were frankly speaking with the very accomplished Harun Akhtar Khan. Thank you for your special insight, Harun Saab, wisdom and openness. It was truly enlightening.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Shah. Thank you for inviting me. Honored.
And for everyone watching, until next time.